Good morning. Good morning. Again, it is a pleasure to be here with you. It's always really great, and I'm so glad that you're here in the D.C. area. You didn't bring in the weather, but hopefully before you leave that the weather would be better. So let me see. First thing is to start to see with the slides. Let's go to slide number 1, please. Very well. This is from the Office of Human Resource Management, and I'd like to give you an update today on where we are, where we've been, and where we're going. And I would say, starting off here, I'd like to say your theme. So to honored guests, colleagues, and friends, it is great to be with you today. I'd like to thank President Patty Wilson for inviting me. And I want to say it is a pleasure to be on the panel with Courtney today. We both will be able to answer your questions just later on. We have collaborated, Courtney and I, on a number of things, including co-chairing the National Employee Forum and working to promote hiring of personnel with disabilities. And to all the professional women comptrollers, congratulations on your 40 years of empowering air traffic control professionals. That is just simply outstanding. So the theme for this year's conference, are you learning as fast as the world is changing? Now that's a great question, and one we must constantly ask ourselves. Just look around you. The world is changing at an incredible rate. Consider, for example, how much our lives have been transformed with the internet and social media and the incredibly power that we now have in our hands with the smartphone technology. Some of you probably can't even spell the word fax or even know what that is. But that was certainly around in my generation. And look at how much the aviation industry alone continues to evolve. You see in every day in your own careers as systems evolves, whether it's in next gen and the changes in how we manage air traffic. At the same time, the use of unmanned aerial vehicles has increased tremendously. And I'm sure you know that there's over 1 million drones registered today. Now, how many of you have them? But how many of you have them registered? Okay, don't want to be a witness to it. But also, there are over 5,000 commercial users, a number which continues to grow every day. Space technology is changing as well with the rapid rise of commercial opportunities in the space industry. And I know you've had a briefing perhaps on this already, but since 1989, we have licensed over 320 commercial space launches. There are currently 10 licensed spaceports in the United States, and several more being built. So again, the world is changing, technology is changing, and so are we. And there's no doubt the world is rapidly changing, and I encourage each of you to examine your own learning path and to seek opportunities to grow and opportunities to learn. I hope to make a small contribution to that learning today by providing with you some updates on key initiatives and programs we are working in the Office of Human Resource Management, along with a brief overview of the organization and functions. HR is comprised of 5 directorates and 1 division. Shown here, these leaders and their teams partner every day to execute the crucial work providing the first-class human resource management to our outstanding FAA workforce. Look at the picture closely. You might note that I have an all-female senior leadership team. Now, this is just one indicator of the increasing role of women in industry and women in the FAA. We have a diverse customer base of over 45,000 employees, of which 24% are women. About 80% of our workforce are mission-critical occupations. These include aviation safety inspectors, engineers, analysts, and systems specialists. Of course, it also includes you, among our 18,000 air traffic controllers, who alone make up 39% of our workforce. And I know this group would be interested to know that over 16% of our controllers are women. You might also be interested to know that we have a broad veteran population. Veterans make up approximately 1/3 of the workforce, a percentage that is competitive with DOD and with the Veterans Administration. We are organized to provide service area management to both align and customer needs as well as to allow us to efficiently manage priorities and workload. Our Office of HR Services, which is known as AHF, performs the critical task of workforce planning support, recruitment, staffing, and personnel action processing. Let's talk about air traffic control hiring. I'm sure you're interested in how we're doing with air traffic control hiring. Well, I'm happy to say our total hires last year were 1,880, and this year we've already reached 67% of our FY18 target of 1,701. I'm telling you, I am very confident that once again, for the third year straight, we're going to make mission, because that's what it's about. There has also been an increase in women controller hires from 13% to 20% during the period of 2015 to 2018. Now, that's really significant. I know you say, oh, I don't see some in certain areas, but they're out there, and I know Trish can certainly attest for that. But we continue to want to grow, and we want to make sure that we mentor the next generations that's going to be following each of you. And for those of you from New York, there's a new legislation for N90, which allows FAA to bid the comptroller job to the local commuting area. We issued bids in March and expect to issue another bid in June, along with another nationwide entry-level bid. We know there are a lot of areas that certainly are tough, and we know that is one of the corridors that's tough, so we're working those. Some of you have asked about our efforts to hire a diverse workforce. Well, I know Courtney, this is certainly one of the things that he's all about, and so am I. My corporate recruitment team, and you have two members of my team, actually, one of them that's in here now, that's also manning the booth out there. My corporate recruitment team, who is led by Tammy Jones, works with the 3 diverse executive action committees, led also by the FAA. 1, persons with target disabilities, led by Courtney Wilkerson. The women's work group, led by Beth Math, who is VP Management Services for ATO. The Hispanic work group, led by Janet Ramos of ABS. Now, through these work groups, we've been working with PwC to promote and recruit women for air traffic as well as other occupations. Last year, we also had a summer cohort program. We had the most that we did ever. We had about 30, and the majority of those were also female. And in this program, we are still going to have it again this year, and we're looking at what are some of the suggestions and topics we can have for the next generation to come in and help us. Also, on workforce reform, the HR Services team is also working on this. Recently, with OPM guidance to reduce the federal workforce, a priority of the current administration, in response, the FAA began applying interim hiring rules to require a check to make sure that 1, we can afford it, and the other, what are those crucial, essential missions? Since then, we've been very successful in bringing non-mission critical down to about 34% with no significant issues or loss of work time. We also have the opportunity to repurpose some of these positions to higher priority for more critical work, which enables the agency to meet its mission. We're also looking at, again, about Vera Visa. That doesn't actually have with everybody, but last year we did, and we're looking at probably doing it again in 19. And this helps us with actually making sure that we not only reduce the workforce, but reduce the workforce so that we can have it so it won't be so top heavy, that we could also hire at lower grades and give other people opportunity to be promoted. Another area is, I know most of you are very familiar with our Office of Compensation and Benefits, Work Life, and they perform major functions which touch our careers and lives daily. These functions include compensation, performance, management, benefits, and retirement services, work-life programs, and workforce compensation. Now, our work-life programs are very popular and widely used. These offerings are designed to help you better manage your life outside the FAA. Many of these benefits are free, available to your entire family, and I said it again, your entire family, and provided with complete confidentiality. Functions include employee assistance, health and wellness, volunteer leave transfer program, child care centers, child care subsidy, and the nursing mothers program, as well as certified counselors for any number of personal challenges. Utilization of our work-life program offered is significant, with 20 to 25% of our employee taking advantage of available programs. The Magellan Employee Assistance Program website, and please, if you have not been to that website, I suggest that you get a chance to look at it, because just over 5,000 hits every year, and we see an average of over 3,200 counseling per year. In 2016, the work-life team, for the first time, because everybody would say everything is done at headquarters. Well, I've initiated, and it started in 2016, that work-life fair not only held at headquarters, but also held out in the regions. Last year, we held it in Dallas, Chicago, and Seattle. This year, we're planning to go into New England on June 12th, in the Central region, and July 11th. There's also a virtual web fair and work-life fairs. So please, you feel free to turn into that. That's going to be on August 15th, so that's regardless of where you are. Now, if you're ever interested in having my team to come out to you, now this is where they do, now we don't do it massages personally, but we do have other people that are out there, because now then I have to go to the accountability board. So we don't do that. But what we do is have people in your local area so you'll be familiar with who's out there that be able to help you. So please let us know. Now, something else I know that you're probably interested in is what I call the voluntary leave bank. My work-life team has been working diligently to add a voluntary leave bank benefit to the FAA's work-life program. Employees may contribute to a single pay period of annual leave, which gives them access to a larger pool of donated leave to draw from once they have exhausted all their acquired sick and annual leave due to a medical condition. Qualifying medical situations are defined in the Family Medical Leave Act and include parental leave for the birth, adoption of a child. An example might be if an employee has back surgery and the recovery may take longer than the employee's current leave balance. If enrolled in this program, the employee would be eligible to request the additional days from the leave bank. Our target rollout for this is not until 2020. I know that seems like a long time, but we want to look into it, make sure we have all the policies, and there's still much to do in this effort, but we're going to get there. What will this help us with? So whether it's, again, the birth of a child, a sick parent, you do an adoption, your puppy is sick, that's you, to leave that leave time to use that. So we wanted to make it flexible for males, females, and all. Now, the FAA will be one of at least 11 federal agencies that offer this volunteer leave banks. So just look how large, really, the federal government is. It's not many that are using it, but my team have been out there to benchmark and see how we can make this work for the agency. Talent development. My Office of Talent Development provides FAA employees with opportunities to learn and grow personally and professionally. It enhances your organization and develop others. Major functions include the FAA Leadership and Learning Institute, known, of course, as FLY, learning services through technology such as the EMS, executive development and human capital, which includes planning and oversight of the FedView. Let's talk about tuition assistance. Our tuition assistance program provides financial assistance in several ways for employees, providing towards a college degree. One component of this program is our degree completion program, which is designated to help FAA employees complete an undergraduate or graduate degree that they have previously started but not yet finished for many reasons. Keep in mind, the criteria of eligibility includes the relevance of your degree, so please, not basket weaving. So it has to really do something with what you're doing and how you're helping you and the agency. So relevance of your degree program to future needs of your line of business and staff offices in the FAA. Participants are selected competitively and can receive up to $4,000 annually in tuition reimbursement for up to 5 years. Now, I know some people want to take the 6 and 7 year program, but again, it's up to the 5 years because we have to be able to cut it off and then certainly offer that for someone else. If you applied for the program this year, you can expect to be notified for our selection decision within the next month. The FAA also participates in a reduced college tuition program, which is administered by the Office of Personnel Management. Last summer, we launched our professional skills development title on M's. The program is designated for the individual contributor level. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to check this out. For the first time, and I'm not sure if I brought the booklet with me. Yes. Jen, if you hold that up, please. Jen is doing Dana White right now. So, so with this actually is a booklet that we've produced where it has every course that is at the fly. It's also a website where you can go on. So you can be the individual contributor. Take these courses, at your desire, and I'll tell you, there's some really great ones. Some of the key skills, and I encourage you to consider, are conflict management, teamwork, critical thinking, decision-making, and problem-solving. When you have the time, look at some of these courses. It's offered to you. So now managers are able to at least, help you with development and help you with mentoring by offering these. So again, it's available for everyone. Succession planning is something else that really the agency don't do as well. But we've also started on succession planning. And this is going to help us determine the business-driven mission that's critical for our agencies. Right now, we're working with 3 lines of business, AVS, ST, and HR in this effort. As I'm almost nearing here, let me just mention to you about our labor and employee relations. It is the FAA's interface with our union partners. We comprise of over 8 unions covering over 35,000 employees, or 78% of our workforce. Functions include collective bargaining, litigation services, arbitrations, statutory compliance. We enjoy strong relations with our union partners. We meet frequently to collaborate and share information at our quarterly labor meeting, which we have one coming up at the middle of the month. AHL is managed employee relations, which includes conduct, discipline, performance. Just to let you know, one update, term negotiations for the National Federation of Federal Employees will be conducted this summer. This union covers approximately 600 employees, including several comptrollers. My last team here is actually called the Accountability and Strategic Business Management, known as AHA. Our Accountability and Strategic Business Management Directors ensures the management of accountability. So this is where we have the accountability board. This is also where we do a lot of data. Just to let you know, types of allegations are typical. Some are verbal, some are written, some are graphic, some are physical harassment. In FY17, the top 3 allegations reported and investigated by the Office of Accountability Board was sexual misconduct, race, and gender. This year to date, the top 3 allegations are sexual misconduct, computer pornography, and gender. This slide just is an example of what we show you here in Human Capital Snapshot. We have several improvements to our data. On this talks to you, we can pull up at any time our population, the number of our mission-critical occupations, our supervisor status, the tenure and position, what the pay plan distribution. This also can tell you the demographics, the gender, ethnicity, who's losing, who's coming, the hiring views. We can tell you all. And we work closely with the lines of business, for that data. That is certainly can be used to help out in a lot of things. Like you said, we have it. Who have education, who, of course, have a degree, basically, is what that is, too. Finally, I just want to mention to you the Policy and Compliance Division, which ensures about policies. Just to mention in particular, we know that we're going to be looking at phased retirement, which I know is of interest to some, but we work closely with the lines of business and staff office to see who would be eligible for that. I want to know, for the first person that can tell me where this is, where is this located? Raise your hand and the person can tell me, where is this? Come on, someone.
That's a simulator?
It's a control tower, yes. Everyone got that right, but do you know where? No, but that's a pretty sight. Not Canada.
Germany.
It's overseas. London. Someone said it. Who said it?
Brussels. Somebody back there said that.
Who said Heathrow? Or London? Come on up. Okay, let's try this again. You didn't see that. Okay. All right, there it is. This is a coin. And thank you. First of all, stepping up because you never know. And believe me, I had to find something that was hard because I figured you all would certainly guess. So there you go. Thank you. All right, very good. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn it over to my co-panelists.
All right, congratulations to PwC on your 40th. I think we share something in common. I'm 40. I feel bad for some of you. But Patty and Christina, thank you for the invitation here. So just a little bit about me, because I think I know and met some of you in different capacities. I started out in the federal government back in 2001 as a legal intern, believe it or not. 13 years later, I'm working for the FAA as a senior executive, handling civil rights matters, diversity and inclusions, and special emphasis. It's been a good journey. I'm glad, Christine, you asked about challenges, because in the field and the work that I do, it does come with challenges. And part of my job is to try to mitigate that so that the burdens, the mental struggles that people bring to the workplace, that we attempt not to change those, but certainly we define what those behaviors should be like while you are in the workplace. One of the principles of EO, and I'm going to get to that later on in a minute, the EOC, is how do we define a model workplace? And they have 6 different elements, and you probably heard me speak about that at different conferences. But they're important because if integrated within your workplace, there's a strong belief that we can mitigate and increase diversity across the field. So with that, let me talk a little bit about civil rights, and then I'm going to get into a presentation that I specifically tailored for you, 2152s and women, designed exactly for some of the things that we're doing here at the FAA. So with that, our mission. ACR's mission and vision is obviously to advise and represent and assist the FAA Administrator on civil rights and equal opportunity matters to ensure the elimination of unlawful discrimination on several bases. But also that another component that doesn't have to do with the workplace is we have a very, very robust external program. And I'm going to introduce Michael. He's my acting deputy now. Michael, raise your hand. He's my acting deputy now, but Michael is my permanent external airport operator in terms of implementing the civil rights policies. And that includes our disadvantaged business enterprise, our Title VI enforcement, our Americans with Disabilities Act, and environmental justice. And up until recent, we've been engaged a lot with ATO, with PBN, for example, noise mitigation and reduction, areas that typically and historically civil rights has not been engaged with. We're now been invited to participate because of the impacts on the community and trying to get minorities and other diverse communities there at the table. So we're happy about that. One of our main principles, if I can add, is to create a positive working environment in the FAA by valuing, using, and managing the differences that individuals bring to the workplace. And I want you to resonate on that because I've had a long, long debate even with staff what that means, right? And I'm going to mention that later on and kind of define because it really shapes when you think about diversity and inclusion. Does it matter if an organization is diverse? Should it matter if an organization is diverse? And that's something that people really need to think about, particularly when you're in a leadership position. All right, next slide for me.
You have the clicker up there.
Oh, do I? No, you have the clicker. Okay. You know I can't see, so I'm all blurred right now. FAA diversity inclusion. Okay, so what I want to talk about today, highlights of the OPM diversity report, which I'm going to share with you and give you some information about that. The bear analysis, let me do it this way. Has anyone in this room not heard of the 2152 bear analysis that Civil Rights conducted? Okay, good. And then our EO, Diversity and Inclusion Action Committee work groups. Anyone familiar with that or not familiar with that? Well, that's excellent then, we're on point. Okay, so the Federal Women's Employment Program, the Hispanic Employees Program, and the Persons with Disability Program. Annie already mentioned who chairs those, and I'm going to give you some information as to the Federal Women's Program and exactly where we are and what we're doing. Next slide, the OPM report. So just a little bit of backdrop on this. If you get a chance, Google this report because it's chock full of information across the board regarding regarding the federal government and the progress or lack of progress that we've made in terms of diversity and inclusion. My first, in my acting capacity, my first one-on-one with Dan Elwell, he was here yesterday, correct? Yes. Yeah. So I had a one-on-one with Dan and Carl Burleson, acting deputy. And I won't get into a lot of what I discussed with them, but in terms of our recruitment, our retention, our hiring and development across the board, we actually have parity from our senior executive service down to our entry levels. Our complaint activity, for example, we went in the last 5 years, I've only been with the FAA for about 5 years now, and one of the things that I incorporated when I came on board was to shift our resources and focus from legal enforcement on the back end. That's the engagement in complaint activity, right? A lot of resources were going that way and it didn't really resolve. And what we found when we did some analytical research was that maybe 95 to 97% of the cases that actually came through the funnel for EO resulted in a non-finding in terms of civil rights violations. Now people look at that and say, well, that's a lot of money, a lot of time and resources that you're spending on something that doesn't bear any fruit. Not true so, or not so true. It doesn't mean that something did not happen between that employee, a peer, or a manager. It just means that it didn't meet the legal threshold, that it was a civil rights issue that really was the impetus behind what happened in that complaint. So now what do you do with that? We have to have some type of policies and strategies to deal with the workplace, because what we don't want to do is leave that unresolved and have you go back into a situation in which you're engaging with a hostile coworker or something as mundane as being a victim of arbitrary leave policy by your manager. So we're coming up with different strategies and policies to deal with that, while we're also keeping the focus on what I refer to as legitimate civil rights issues, where there's evidence that something happened on a legal basis or on an unlawful basis. So this report, as I'm walking in to give him some of the good news, that with the toolkit that we created, maybe back in 2013, 2014, the emphasis, as I mentioned earlier, shifted from complaint activities to things like training. We doubled our goal on training around at facilities, right? Making sure that managers and both employees were taking advantage of learning, because I strongly, strongly believe that learning is repetitious. The more you hear it, the more it's in front of you, the more it's going to be incorporated into your daily activities, and that paid off dividends. We also had facility assessments. As Annie mentioned, I've been a permanent member of the Accountability Board for 5 years now, and the stories that I've heard, the reports, the investigations, the things that I read that are happening out there in these control towers historically, the TRACONs, someone in the hallway just told me about their first encounter when they came on board as air traffic controller, and their engagement with a male who ended up being a manager or a mentor at the time. The things that women have to deal with, and that's why sexual harassment is still the #1 claim, both in EO as well as the Accountability Board. The Washington Post recently highlighted, I know Patty, you mentioned having some discussion on the Me Too movement, and I gave you my thoughts around that, and I won't get into details, but what I will share is that, and I shared this with Andy before, is that the Accountability Board and the agency's approach to dealing with sexual harassment, the equitable values that come out of that, as well as how quickly we address those issues, was highlighted in the beginning of the Me Too movement. And so I was happy to read those articles in which they specify not DOT, but the FAA as a best in class when it comes to the rights of women in the workplace, as well as the leveraging of sexual harassment issues. And so I say all that to say that I had a good story coming in with Dan, and this article pops up on my page. And it kind of caught me off guard because I worked with Zena Such, who is the Diversity and Inclusion Director for OPM. And she and I have worked together and done some presentations, and we worked together back at Department of Ag during the days when it was really a hostile place to work in. And I didn't get a heads up on this report. And the reason why I was a little burned out by it is because it specifically mentions DOT as being in the worst place in the recruitment and retention of women. And I had prepared some talking points to Dan or some things that we're going to do. And when you say DOT, you really mean FAA, because we own, what is it, 80% of the workforce with DOT? Some 46,000 employees from FAA, and I think 56 or 58,000 overall for DOT. And so the impact and the implication is that the FAA is not doing what it should do when it comes to the hiring and retaining of women in this workforce. And so I put together some thoughts, and I'm going to share with you some of the demographics here. The report shows that the levels have improved a little, stayed flat, or in some areas regressed over the most recent period that was studied. The percentage of minorities in the senior executive service remained the same for fiscal year 16 as well as fiscal year 15. Noted in the Federal Equal Opportunity Recruitment Program to Congress, which this report goes and gets presented to Congress every year, women demonstrated the largest SES increase with a 1% point bump up to 35%. Still far below the portion of your workforce. So your workforce numbers, if I can recall, I think in comparison to the civilian labor force are about 48%. Here at the FAA, we're at 26.63%. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do. And with 2152s taking the lion's share of occupations, the focus for me this year and next year would be on recruitment for those particular disciplines. Next slide, please. All right, so some of the highlights. The absence between mission accomplished and diversity and inclusion programs, the inability to articulate the return on investment for having such programs, and then the lack of a rigorous and analytical basis for having those. It's no secret that right now there are some in a very high senior leadership position, I'm sure you've heard of them, who've taken that approach to the question that I asked earlier, whether having a robust diversity and inclusion program is worth it. What is the return on investment here? And shouldn't we just focus on the most qualified? Well, my response to that is that it's not mutually exclusive. Why not both? It's not one or the other. Hiring decisions that create a workforce that does not reflect the changing demographics of our nation are likely to have unintended consequences. Our federal government functions best when it's equipped with qualified individuals who meaningfully reflect and represent the country they serve. Perhaps for this reason, the EOC's Strategic Enforcement Plan for fiscal years 2018 through 2022 highlights becoming a model employer and defines the terms based on the MD 715. Ironically, when I leave here, I have a meeting with the EOC. They're going to brief me and my team on the new strategic goals and plans that they have, which should align with Secretary Chow's new 4-point priorities that you probably heard about yesterday. And ironically, we just had our executive offsite where we've quelled down from a corporate metrics and corporate goals from 30 as a legacy system down to 18. And so it's a perfect storm, perfect time for us to really level set what we're going to be doing as an agency, in particular in civil rights, to ensure that diversity and inclusion is a part of that strategic goals and part of that strategic plan. OPM is highlighting underrepresentation, and the EOC is focusing not only on becoming a model employer, but also on leadership and accountability. And that's something that really makes a difference. I know you hear that, and sometimes it sounds cliche, But having leadership buy in to having a diverse workforce really makes a difference, because that's where the support, the resources come from. And you'll see on my next subject, the barrier analysis wouldn't get done unless you had that kind of leadership support around it. And that's why it's the number one element when it comes to what is required for a model workplace. Next slide, please. All right, so the barrier analysis. The 7 decision points, and some of you, like you said, have been briefed on this, so I just wanted to remind you because it's really a good segue into where we're going in terms of our federal women's program. So our report focused on 7 decisions that had impact, or potentially at the time had impact, and that was defining the minimum qualifications, the ATSAT, which most, if not all of you, are familiar with and have taken, preparation for the referral list, the centralized selection panel, the interview, and we all kind of chuckled when we saw the interview because it basically just confirmed whether or not you was able to speak English well or not. And so that was one of the things that certainly fell off the list. And then medical clearance and security, which have been actually awesome in terms of supporting the new model that we have. Next slide. If you look at, and the reason why I have this here, we did the 7-point result, and we hired an industrial psychologist out of University of Maryland, Dr. Hanges and Dr. Oots, who did a very, very deep dive on the 2152 series at each point of the hiring up and through the passage from Academy to determine if there's any factors that had an adverse impact on any particular group. And let me just pause right there and just give you a quick educational update in terms of civil rights. So civil rights, when you look at EO, is based on 3 different distinct, what they call theories of law, right? The Supreme Court back in the 1970s defined how one, as a practitioner, would look at civil rights and make a determination. The first is intentional determination. And that is what it is. If someone takes action against you, is directed towards you, there's evidence of it, they refer to that as intentional discrimination. A third, and I'm going to get to the second in a minute because it implies here in this chart. The third is retaliation and reprisal. We really want to protect people's rights when they engage, and there's trepidation sometimes when individuals engage in the EO process, whether as a witness or as a complainant, because in the real world, there's fears around what's going to happen to me after I do that. And so that's one of the most component and important theories, because we have to protect the integrity of the process and you who are actually part of that process. And we're doing a great job in that in terms of mitigating that down. The second, and the one that implies here, is what you call, forgot my thought. Disparate impact, disparate impact. Disparate impact is when you have a neutral policy or a neutral practice, but on its face and in practicality, it has an adverse impact on any one particular group. Courts have ruled that as illegal. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person or a bad agency. It just means that you have to look at ways to shift and refocus so that whatever you thought was a good idea, in this case, the hiring and the 7 decision points and steps to hire 2152s at some of those locations, it had an impact on a particular class. If you look at ASSAT in this chart here, it's the one decision point that universally impacted women, African Americans, Asians, and those who identified with multi-race. Also, at a subsequent study, it also impacted those with disabilities. So in our deep dive and in our reform practices, in which Annie and her team took lead, we made recommendations. We've been civil rights after we did the barrier analysis, but Annie and her team did an awesome job of walking through and identifying the corrective measures to ensure that the hiring reform and practices would alleviate some of the stress in terms of discrimination. And so if you look at the terms now, ATSAT has now turned into ATSA. There is a plausible study now that our classes from 2014 have gone through and hopefully matriculated, and I think I met a couple who said they've come through during the new hire phase since 2014 are now CPCs, We are now planning to study that and determine whether or not the corrective measures that we implemented and or recommended are actually being effective. Is it causing efficiencies? And is it yielding the benefits and return on investment that we thought and anticipated? Because we put a lot of resources into this, and we want to ensure that both women and other minorities are making it to CPC without having a washout rate at any point throughout that process. So what you see on the screen now is just the legacy system in terms of the flow chart. Next slide, please. All right, so some of you have asked me when I walked in the door, and I think Beth Mack was up here who mentioned that I had a lot of stats, and sometimes I try to remember what those stats are, but I'm not going to cheat today. So this is, because I know that some folks will write this down and say, Courtney said. So what you see here are the onboard of employees for the 2152s. And the reason why I want to show you that is because we're actually making a little progress here. Some of the reforms that we're doing, I'm going to get to that now next, are again paying the dividends, and we've seen an increase. If you look at the new hires for women, it has increased from previous years. It's now at 23.21%, and then the actual onboard, the 16.33% that we currently have, was a substantial increase from 2014, 2015, and 2016. And so we are seeing progress, but like I mentioned earlier, our overall agency demographics around women is still very stagnant at 26.33%. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot here, just some data in terms of, if you look at the red columns, that's are the women. Each year, it looks very stagnant, no progress. The blue represent male, and this is FAA-wide workforce. And in the last column, we look at the civilian labor force, and that's where I got that earlier figure from, the 48.16%. And so what we try to do is each quarter take a deep dive look and really make a determination if some of the policies that we've implemented are paying off the dividends. And if they're not, then that's when you need to be very fluid. I know that we don't do that well in the government sometimes. I can appreciate the new leadership here at the FAA. They're taking a very corporate approach that we want rapid decisions that are based on data, that are based on intuitive knowledge, that are based on achieving the returns that we expect them to achieve. And if they don't, then we're right back in the boardroom trying to identify other ways, whether that's with industry or with other best practices throughout the government. So what we're getting to, the EO Action Committee for the Diversity, this was established back in 2010. It's an executive level representation, and what I mentioned earlier is that we have 3 different work groups that we're focusing on for the last 2 years. That's the Federal Women's Program, the Hispanic Employment Program, and certainly meeting our executive goals around the hiring of persons with disabilities. Just to give you some names, Beth Mack for the Women's Program is the executive level champion. And as you see there on the chart, Sadie and Timmy, and there's Sadie there, raise your hand, Sadie, who works for, she works on my staff. You have Ranisha, I think I saw her earlier here, Aaron Ballard and Aaron Newton out of ABS, Sabrina Keys from Airport, Teresa Brown and Lenice from AFN, Tammy Jones and Caesar from HR, and Ash is Dominique Wallace, Sharita Banks, and Deborah Kennedy. And then of course we have your very own leadership, Patty Wilson, who is a surrogate member of the EAC and representing PwC. If only I can get her to come to more meetings, so. I'm kidding. No, she's a great advocate. She's a great advocate and has been for a while, and I enjoy working with her. All right, so some of the highlights for the Federal Women's Program. You see the left column represent what we accomplished in 2017, and the right column represents what we accomplished in 2018. So I won't go through all of them, but what I do want to highlight is the activity around the Aviation and Space Education Program, so known as AFSED, and STEM. All right. So I mentioned the 2152 barrier analysis. That was followed because, and the reason why that was first is because obviously that's our largest critical occupation. But it was also followed up with ABS in their 1825 Aviation Inspector Series. And recently I had a briefing with Von Turner over in Tech Ops. As the third largest, his 2101 series, the third largest occupation. And the reason why I mention those is because the results of the bear analysis all said the same. It's that the recruitment, the pipeline just does not exist in its current form for women. All right, and I want to be honest and transparent with that. There was nothing identified separate and apart from the 2152s where we had different decision points that were knocking out folks at different stages in that hiring process. Not so true when you came to the more technical work field. What we found is that in large volumes, women were not either being recruited and or not applying. And at the very least, Aviator was kicking them out. And we got real lifetime examples of folks who were doing some of these services for the military and were handpicked to apply for these jobs and had history and experience doing the exact same thing that we're looking for here at the FAA. And unfortunately, at that time, Aviator was disqualifying those individuals from further consideration. We have since, with Annie's leadership, made significant changes to the system, and we're now seeing an improvement in terms of recruitment. But we want to do a deep dive at the time with Peggy Gilligan and her group, now with Ali, who's the AVS 1, as well as Terry Bristol, Vaughn. We recently met with them, and we all agreed that we have to delve down into the elementary schools, junior high, high school, and then certainly colleges to ensure that we have a population of individuals, particularly women, who are interested in our technical fields. Our last approach previously was to look at the employable work life and work field, and we found that we didn't have a high population of folks who are interested at that level. And so what we want to do is get some excitement around folks. My daughter, for example, who's very affable and excited when it comes to computer programming, robotics, things of that nature. And I think that if we get into these schools and have these partnerships, that we'll have a greater interest into the aviation workforce. One of the things I also want to mention, I was looking at the reauthorization bill last night, and we're rapidly going through a lot of amendments, right? So Chairman Schuster, and I was happy to see because it had his particular amendment had several civil rights issues dealing with the airports. Now I won't get into the non-ones that won't apply to you, but one that did apply was his interest in the recruitment and retention overall for STEM activities, but he also highlighted women in particular. And so the language, let me see if I have it here, he, for some reason, wanted us to engage at the junior high level and continue a collaborative effort where we perhaps provide opportunities, internships along the way throughout the life cycle of these individual students with the FAA and with other aviation partners to increase not only their awareness, but obviously their interest, and introduce them into the workforce pipeline. There's a notion that we are experiencing now that there may be a wave. You know, I've heard about the baby boomers all leaving at the same time in the federal workforce. The same may be true of the aviation industry. We're researching that. I don't know if it's true or not, but certainly there's a theory out there that beyond the walls of FAA, that there may be an adverse impact in terms of manufacturers, engineers, pilots, and so Annie mentioned earlier that she'll be taking lead at the executive sponsorship in terms of the priorities to examine that and provide recommendations and findings, and I'll certainly be there to assist. Okay, one of the other things I want to highlight, next slide, is, and this is really, as Mr. Joe Biden used to say, a big deal. And we partnered, we being civil rights, with ATO, and I want to give a lot of kudos to Sadie and Deputy Vice President Jeff Plenty, who had the vision of how can we incorporate persons with disabilities into the 2152 series, because that came with all the challenges, whether that was physical challenges or otherwise. And so they explored all kind of ways, and what we came up with was using the 2199 internship series and identifying a class of individuals to start, I believe, this fall. Is that correct? This fall. To be introduced into a cycle of 7 different service centers across the nation. And there were some methodologies around which service centers were chosen. But the team identified 7, and we're going to place these individuals there with a sponsor on site to get them acclimated to working in the air traffic organization, with the goal of converting them at some point when they pass ADSAT, the bio, all of the requirements will still be there, medical, security, and then graduate from the academy for facility placement, to place them into a real live working center, whether it's a center where they started or a subsequent center in the pipeline, and convert them to 2152s. If we're successful, and success being defined on a low bear as one of the 22 passing through, because like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of challenges around introducing persons with targeted disabilities into the 2152 series. But if we're successful, we're trying to replicate that process for women next, and then for the Hispanic population. It's going to be a little different because we don't have the legal basis for what we're doing here with persons with disabilities. That's the one affirmative action program that the federal government and the courts have recognized, because they're the most severe population in terms of work. But we can, with legal's help, structure a similar type of apparatus around the ADP program, and hopefully have the same kind of pipeline success for women coming into the workforce. So what I have after that, and that's just what I want to mention that pertains exactly to your series, but I have a lot of data because I'm a data guy. I won't go through it all, but I'll certainly make it available for you if you want to flip through just some of it, Sadie, because I do want to save time for question and answers. But some of that data is identified and is data for the overall FAA workforce, but particularly the ATO community. And we can break it down as far down as you want. Your service center, your region, your state, whatever you need, and do a comparative analysis against the FAA, which I don't recommend, because if the FAA is flawed in terms of its demographic, then the information that you're looking at would also be flawed. So I want to compare apples to apples. And the benchmark is working with the Department of Labor and their Bureau of Labor and Statistics, where we get our data from, which is the civilian labor force data. And that's the eligible population of individuals here in America who should and could be working but are not. And that's where we get our statistics from. And that tells you your health and wellness in terms of the organization. So with that, I guess we're almost ready for questions. But before I do, I want to mention just one thing on a high note. Someone during the break asked me, what was it like to be an executive, and particularly an executive working at the FAA and now acting -1, reporting into politicals and leadership? And so I thought about it, and I want to answer it this way. It's a story of the eagle, the rabbit, and the fox. Has anyone heard that story before? Good. Okay. So the story goes like this. On a particular day, both the eagle, the rabbit, and the fox are very, very hard workers. On this one hot day, the eagle decides that he doesn't want to work for his family anymore, and he wants to take a break. So he finds the highest tree and soars over to it and lands on a perch. And for the rest of that day, he nestled in and took a nap and decided to deflect away from his responsibilities of work. The rabbit comes along, sees the eagle resting, and decides, I too want to rest. So it hops along the grassy knoll to the same tree, finds a little area in the shade, and decides to take a nap. The fox says, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So it comes out of the brushes, and right when it defines and identifies a nice spot for it to rest, it looks over around the tree and sees the rabbit and decides, I'd rather have lunch right now. And it eats the rabbit. So the moral of the story of working as an executive is, if you decide to rest, if you decide to abdicate your responsibilities at work, make sure you're at the very top. Thank you.
Thank you both. We are going to have about 10 minutes now for questions, if anybody has any questions for Annie and Courtney.
Good morning. Thank you for being here with us. So for the last couple of weeks, Rosacea and I have been emailing back and forth, and what we've been trying to obtain are some statistics, and since you stated you're a data guy, I'm hoping. So here's the statistic we have not been able to find, and we also checked with Oklahoma City, the academy, to see if by chance they had it. So here's the question. I know that the FAA, since forever, has been engaging in recruiting women. I can remember for decades, that's been a focus the FAA has had. So the question that comes to mind is, after all these years, why has our number only increased 3% from 1993 to today? And so you have to, I would think, evaluate, okay, what are some of the factors that have possibly occurred? Of course, failing part of the training could be a possibility. So then the question is the percentage of women that are hired compared to the percentage of women that successfully complete the air traffic training program and become CPCs. I would think that would be a great statistic to have, and then to break it down where it's failing. And I can't find that statistic.
Well, that's a great question. Let me answer it this way. Are you referring just to
To the 2152,
Okay.
yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Is it on? Okay, great question. I just want to clarify, is that the 2152s that you're looking for?
Yes.
All right, so ironically, I just had a discussion, and I'm going to have it again this Friday with the administrator. So when we conducted the initial bear analysis, and it was about a year, it was commissioned about a year before I arrived here at FAA. It went through application through the academy, and then it stopped there. And so my initial question when I became acclimated and briefed on was, as defined, you are not a CPC, obviously, until you complete your I believe, 2 years of training at a facility, or up to 2 years at a facility.
Yeah.
And so we really don't know whether or not the changes that we made as a result of the bear analysis, the recruitment that you mentioned, and I agree, there was a lot of effort in terms of recruitment, whether or not post-academy are women or any other group, but particularly women, having difficulties during the training and are washing out at a rate that is higher and noted. So what I've agreed to do, and I put this as a caveat, because I have not been authorized to do it yet. It will take a decision at a much higher level than I. But what I'm proposing is to implement the so-called phase 2 bear analysis, which will look at both women and other minority groups post-academy through CPC and see if we have any deficiencies. It's right along the lines of what I'm trying to change in terms of our focus at the in civil rights. There are things that we do very, very well, and as I mentioned during the presentation, we've seen a huge reduction in complaint activity, almost 50% in 3 years, which is unheard of. We've seen positive reflects on the training, the ADR programs that we have, everything that should work is working. And so we have parity across the FAA in terms of groups, but not in particular technical fields like ATO. And so I want to do a deep dive to ensure that there's no other barriers that exist throughout that life cycle from application, but particularly in the phase 2 portion, which is once you graduate academy, and determine if there are, what can we do to amend or fix those.
Thank you very much.
Certainly.
Hi, I'm Diana from Minneapolis Center. I've got a question for both of you. The first question would be for, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. Annie, thank you. I was afraid to say that because I thought I was wrong. So I have recently found out as a 2152 from being in the military, and I am a 2152 for the FAA. that there is a form, RI 20-124, that as a military member I can submit, and if the military will confirm on that form that I was a 2152 in the military, then that time would actually be counted as part of my good time towards retirement. But I can't, other than finding this form and having that information, I can't find any other way to follow through to get the answer, or even where do I mail that form to? Would you be able to help me find that information?
Most certainly. And that would be coming out of our benefits office,
Okay.
which is actually out of Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay.
And they do all the compensation. Please make sure, and I'll be staying here for lunch, that you give me your name
Okay.
and your email address, and I'll make sure that we'll take care of that for you.
Okay, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Continuing on.
Only because I know you so well.
The persons with disability that you were talking about, it's always been something that's been interesting, and why don't we have anybody with disabilities working in our environment is always made me scratch my head. So you have a plan to put some folks in the facilities.
Correct.
What is that going to look like? And if it's at a facility that one of us is at, how can we be of help to that individual?
Okay, great. Can you put the chart back up? So, an important aspect, Diane, is obviously having a champion on site with the individuals. We are going through the process now of selecting the 21 or 22 individuals who would be likely to be successful candidates, because we really want, this is our first time thinking outside the box in terms of persons with disabilities, and particularly persons with targeted disabilities. Two different fields. One is a subset of the other. One is more severe in terms of employment and whatnot. So the way the program is designed, we've already did the legwork in terms of identifying the 7 service areas. We're now working with identifying both the manager and an on-site sponsor for those individuals. I think you're going to hear from Abigail Smith later on today or tomorrow. She's taking lead with the curriculum, the training that will be provided to those folks. The important aspect that we all agreed on is that we don't want to veer off, really don't want to veer off at all in terms of what they should experience. So it's not a set-aside program, it's a qualifying program. The only difference is we're adding soft touches, like I mentioned, the hands-on sponsorship and mentorship while you're there, because it may come with unique challenges. But after that year, then they will apply year, meaning the hands-on experience year, and they'll apply just like anyone else would apply, whether they're CTI, whether they're general public announcements, and take the bio, ASAT, get trained at the academy. If there's any special accommodations, we've moved up medical, and medical is going to be an on-case situation, an individual assessment of the party to ensure that, for 2 reasons. Number one, that you're cleared to be able to be a 2152, because that's the ultimate objective. And then secondary, if there's any reasonable accommodation issues at the academy that we need to introduce prior to you arriving to the academy to mitigate those kind of concerns. And then post-academy, if they're successful with their ASAT score, then they'll enter into the pipeline and/or have first right of refusal to return back to their quote-unquote home service center. All right.
Hello, Amy Magstead, Kansas City Center. We at PwC have all been pretty active with recruitment at STEM events, high school career fairs. And one of my visions has been to somehow establish with a high school to teach an ATC class for a semester with students. What surprises me about working these career events, the kids aren't even aware of what we do and how we work. And when we display to them our equipment, what they see on the scope, they're all fascinated. They all love it. You both touched on it. Thank you for coming today. How can we get help from you to work with the education department to possibly include these in high school curriculums as far as opportunities? Not all students want to go to college, and some of them want to do an avenue besides the military, maybe realize that ATC is a possibility for them, not just for women, but for other children, since we're working with recruitment. You touched on it. Give me some more background on where you're thinking of going with that, and then I can take it and work with the high schools that I've already kind of earmarked to be working with.
Well, first of all, just in charge of all recruiting, thank you for your efforts and the many efforts of many of you that I know may not always get reported, but the efforts that you're doing to the local high schools and colleges. We continue to need that from everyone to be successful across the board. One, getting into those schools is not always an invitation from all, but when we talk about STEM, and sometimes they use the term STEAM because they bring art into it, we have a manager that goes to those programs. But trying to get into some of the educators, that is something that we'll have to look into even further to see how do we do that throughout the United States. Right. We have some schools, mostly those that are engineering and aeronauticals that are prime, come in and let us know what you're doing. But it's the constant, steady effort of you going to those schools and getting the parents involved. So I don't know if there's something also, and I'm just thinking about this as we're talking, about having town halls. If you get parents involved, those parents can help make a movement in those schools better perhaps than you and I. And they'd want that because so many things now, you know, we showed you about what's going on in commercial space, the drones. Yeah. We need individuals and leaders that we don't even know what's out there yet. So I would ask you, I do have my recruitment team, and I would like for you to talk with them about the ideas and things that you're working and see what we can come up with, because we can't do this alone with the numbers that I have, but we certainly can do this together.
That would be great. I would really appreciate that.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you.
Hi, Jamie Feger. I'm at the command center, and I'm just going to try to parlay into her question because mine sort of had to do with hers. I'd like to up-level it to the university level. So I went back to school to get a minor in commercial space and UAS systems, and I'm talking to Embry-Riddle, and they absolutely have no idea anything other than a CTO program. So when I'm talking to the advisor, I'm telling them my experiences in route, my experiences in safety management systems, my experience is in frontline management, I have management experience. I'm telling them all this, and they absolutely no credit for any of that because they said the only data that they're able to pull from the FAA is the CTO certificates and the pilot licensing. So I'm wondering if we can have some sort of discussion or relationship on informing universities, and this is the Aeronautical University, informing them of the talent and expertise that we do have in the FAA for people who are trying to go back to get their degree. On the second part of that, is all the, we do, oh gosh, to empower the women here. On the heels of what Beth Mack said, and in asking us to go out to talk to at least 10 women, girls, whatever, we do a lot of volunteer work in here in the STEM field. Tours, we do Women in Aviation, Girls in Aviation Day, we do career days at elementaries, all these things. And in my experience so far has been that there is no reporting of this. We have one office that we are going to now, and the FAA, in my humble opinion, is not capturing all that work that is being done. And if we are going to be asked to go talk to these individuals, can we get some sort of knowledge from your office when it comes to questions that I get asked quite often of little girls, high schoolers, businesswomen? How do I apply for the FAA? What's the training like? What's the hiring process like? It changes so much that it's hard to get that information so that we are in the know and we are up to speed to be able to answer those questions when we go do this work. So support, again, like how can we work with somebody in your office to accomplish those?
Yes, you most certainly can. And first of all, thank you so much for bringing that up. You're right. There's a lot of times I'm not sure of all the great things. I keep telling my folks, go out there, but I know it can't be with them alone. I do thank you for and you're right, we don't capture all the great stuff or the areas and things that you're doing. And yes, before you leave here today, or before I leave here today, I will get you in touch with my recruitment team, who again is outside here recruiting, because I need that information so we can see where you are, that we're not doubling and tripling in the same efforts. There also need to be, or come up with something working closely with you and the team, an effort of what are these common questions that are asked, so we can put this out there through your website or any website that we have. These are things we can work with ATO to publish and put out. So yes, we'd like to work closely with you, to partner with you, to see how else we can help you.
Even just something as simple as talking points, so that we're on the same, when we go out to talk to people about what the FAA, what the agency is doing to hire people, we're on the same page as HR.
Consider it done. We will certainly have something to you.
We're going to take one more. They will both be here for lunch. If you guys have questions.
So I'm going to piggyback on those two. So I do I've always done mentoring, love mentoring. I've worked with the high school, college too. And most recently I'm retired and I work with the inner city children in Cleveland, Ohio. And there's a program started by Stedman Graham called the True to You. And it's trying to get them career oriented in junior high. So one problem that I've had, and I've gone back to my old facility that I worked at in Cleveland, I said, could I get some material to hand out to these kids? Do you know of a video? So just what she said, I need a point of contact somewhere in either that region, that service area, that I can get information, because my facility pretty much said they don't have time to go out and get this information for me. And in the facility I was at, the number of minority and women at that facility was right in line with your numbers. But that county is over 60% minority and women. So how can you have a facility, have less than, 16% minority, yet the environment around it isn't? And they're not even going to those high schools because they don't have a point of contact to help them with that process.
First of all, let me just say and introduce you to the head of my recruiting here, Tammy Jones. Not only are we here, but we want to make sure, and we've been listening to the things that you've been saying, and I want to make sure every last one that's interested in the recruiting, the efforts that you're doing, and I've already told them things are going to be done. So we're going to come out with a talking points so that we'll be able to distribute, and she's saying yes now. I'm going to follow up through it because I'm sure you all know apparently all my email addresses, my private one, LinkedIn, Facebook. Okay, so you are in touch with me. So we're going to do those things.
And a fun video maybe, something fun for, high school, because they have videos for the younger, they have stuff for younger kids, but it'd be fun to have something for the older kids.
Yes.
We'll have one central location for everybody to be able to go and get it.
Right. So again, for those things that we're dealing with recruiting, how we can help, how we can do better, how we can service you, sometime even with supplies, which I know are somewhat difficult at some times, some video, you'll be surprised, even 7th and 8th grades can make videos and do things. So we're going to work with you. She's here to do that. For those of you, again, I'm sorry, what's your first name? Diana, to talk to me about some credit that you've had from the military and you want to, anyone with those issues or want to know where to go to get those documented, please let me know. I'm going to turn it back into your hands. I'm going to be here to talk with you. I thank you so much for inviting me also tonight for the mentoring session, so I look forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.